man must do his bit.
Welcome to another edition of The Public Interest. My name is David Granger, and in this series of programs, we examine issues which are of concern to Guyanese, those abroad, but particularly those at home. And today we're looking at those who live in communities, particularly rural and municipal communities, mostly in the coast of Guyana, because as you know, in the hinterland communities, many of the villages are governed by the Amerindian Ordinance. But the air is filled with talk about local government elections. But my friends, local government elections should not necessarily mean local democracy. And people are talking about capturing strongholds and controlling local councils. But nobody's talking about the quality of life of the people who are living in those communities. This is not a contest between one party and another party. This is a contest between poverty and prosperity. And local government elections, to mean anything, must bring about prosperity for the people through democratic means. It means that the people have to be consulted. Otherwise, local government elections leading nowhere. It means that we will simply have a continuation of the status quo if democracy, local democracy, is not embedded and implanted in people's attitudes as they go to the polls. This is what local government elections should mean. And we need to examine the local government elections. I'm not talking ancient history here. I'm talking about where we should go in future. Let us look at the situation, because I feel that local democracy, as opposed to local elections, local democracy is the lifeblood of the political process. And this is an occasion for massive public participation. Unfortunately, and paradoxically perhaps, attendance and participation in local government elections is usually lower than general and regional elections. Everybody gets excited about general and regional elections, but there's not much excitement for local government elections. But I believe if you read the media reports, you'll see that recent pronouncements calling attention to some people's intention to capture other people's strongholds. It's almost as if we're in Ukraine again. But this is Guyana, and we want people to have a good life. This is what we aim at, and this is what local government elections should produce. Local democracy should decentralize responsibility to democratic institutions at three levels. At the regional level, that is, everybody lives in a region. There are 10 regions in Guyana. Everybody lives in a region. At municipal level, there are 10 towns, as you know. And at neighborhood level, and there are 70 or so neighborhood democratic councils. All of these levels, all three of these levels, regional, municipal, and neighborhood, have elected chairmen. And of course, towns have mayors, and they all have councillors. These are people who are elected to administer these particular councils and municipalities and neighborhoods. The Constitution, the country's supreme law, states that local government is a vital aspect of democracy and shall be organized so as to involve as many people as possible in the task of managing and developing the communities in which they live. That is the supreme law of the land. You can see, therefore, my friends, it is an essential element of inclusionary democracy. That is inclusionary democracy. And of course, the Constitution calls it inclusionary democracy. And as you know from the recent past, local government elections in 2016 under the APNU-AFC coalition restored democracy at the local level after the PPPC's deliberate obstruction for more than two decades. The Constitution And don't let us run too far from the Constitution. It's an important document, not just prescriptive, but something that should be, executive in character, that we should try to obey the Constitution. It prescribes that, and let me quote again, the principal objective of the political system of the state is to establish an inclusionary democracy by providing increasing opportunities for the participation of citizens and their organizations in the management and decision-making processes of the state, with particular emphasis on those areas of decision-making that directly affect their well-being. One NGO has even called itself, Article 13, to emphasize the importance of inclusionary democracy. So let us get away from this idea of winner takes all and one party state. We are always looking at inclusionary democracy. And this is what is prescribed by the Constitution. This is what it means. We mustn't disregard the Constitution. We mustn't disdain the provisions of the Constitution. Now, what has happened in local democracy? And there's no doubt in my mind that the People's Progressive Party Civic impaired the performance of local democratic organs when it was in office. It impaired the prospects of urban and rural economic development, and it impaired the promotion of local democracy. Don't forget, the PPP was in office for, since 1992, for 23 years until 2015, and they're in office again. Let us look at the facts. The facts are that local democracy was resisted by the PPP administration because it refused to enact approved changes to legislation which were passed by the National Assembly. This is during the time that the APNU plus AFC, although not in a coalition, had a combined majority in the National Assembly. The National Assembly passed legislation, and the president at the time refused to give his assent to one particular important bill. In fact, that was the action which triggered the threat of a no confidence motion, because the civil society came out in support of APNU, AFC. The diplomatic service came out in support, the diplomatic corps came out in support of the recommendations we were making. 20 years without local government elections. And now some people are pretending to be champions of that. In any event, it is historical fact that the PPP administration refused to enact or to assent to the legislation that was passed, properly passed by the National Assembly. It refused to conduct local government elections. And as you can see, the APNU AFC was in office for 10 months between May 2015 and March 2016, and we were able to hold elections. The PPP has already been in office for 30 months, and they're still kicking the can down the road. So that is a fact, that's a historical fact. The PPP refused to cooperate with the elected NDCs. When the PPP was in office, 1992 to 2015, it actually removed 36 neighborhood democratic councils, 36, and installed their own handpicked IMCs. APNU can boast that in its 5 years, not a single IMC was ever installed, not a single NDC was ever suspended. You can see what's happening, my friends. That local democracy is not about control and capturing, it's about allowing the people to make their own decisions. There were demonstrations all over the country as members of elected NDCs picketed the ministers of local government when they went around suspending the elected bodies and installing their own handpicked IMCs. Don't forget, Don't forget these instances, my friend. 36 NDCs were suspended. And in general, the PPP refused to abandon the colonial era direct district administration. All of the regions, with some uh, territorial geographical modifications, were based on the colonial district. And those of you old enough would remember the districts were run by district commissioners. And those were very powerful. Those were little governors. Those were little governors. In fact, in earlier times before independence, district commissioners would actually turn up with a little cork hat and white tunic and all that. Um, but that type of administration did not allow for the participation of the ordinary citizens. In fact, there were no democratic elections at that time. That's before universal adult suffrage was introduced. But the district commission would just assemble a group of citizens, and they would call that a district council, but it wasn't elected. So this is what the PPP is taking us back to. They don't want debate and discussion. They want to have a direct form of administration, which does not involve the people. It does not involve consultation and cooperation with the ordinary residents. This is the situation that existed under the PPP. Refusal to enact laws passed by the National Assembly, refusal to cooperate with NDCs, refusal to abandon the colonial era district administration model. And as a result of that, when the APNU AFC got into office in 2015, we changed all that. We were the ones who restored democratically elected town councils and NDCs. This is exactly what happened. And we had our first election in March 2016, less than a year after we got into office. Local democracy, my friends, was being undermined by the deliberate disdain for the Constitution, which states, and let me quote the Constitution again, the Constitution at Article 71 states that in the management and development of the region, every council must devise its general development plans and programs. The council, not the minister, every council must design its own development program for the entire region, of course. But the PPP's policies undermine the role of the councils and the role of the chairman. Everything comes from 4th Street, Kingston, instead of grassroots democracy, local democracy. This is exactly what happens. And I can tell you from experience between 2015 and 2020 that the attempts by the Ministry of Communities, and we renamed it, instead of government, we renamed it communities, to show the sort of ideological commitment that we had to development of communities rather than governing communities. And the PPP deliberately undermined the functions of that ministry. In fact, the ministry set up something called the National Regional Development Consultative Committee. And this was done to ensure that the RDCs and NDCs and town councils could meet to plan regional development. And the PPP refused to attend. The PPP chairman did not attend. Although the minister called this conference, they did not attend. And a local government conference was held, they did not attend. And many of them actually openly said they will not work with APNU AFC administration. In fact, under the law, there was little that the Minister of Communities could do to compel their attendance or even to compel their participation. I don't like to use the expression, but there was almost a civil war taking place between the PPP, which was in opposition at that time, and APNU AFC administration, which was in government. There are few instances in which there was real cooperation. In fact, there were even designs for regional flags, and the PPP refused to countenance it. Although some PPP regions actually adopted flags. Some regions do have flags, but the PPP administration or the PPP opposition took a policy not to cooperate with anything that would even benefit the people or make the APNU AFC coalition look good. That was the level of non-cooperation. So when you see problems in the regions, those problems were not caused by APNU AFC neglect. They were caused by direct action and opposition by the People's Progressive Party. My friends, there are 10 regional democratic councils. There are 10 town councils. Of course, the APNU AFC actually created 4 of those towns and held elections so that they can have town councils for the first time. I mean, even in Lethem, which is the capital town of the largest region, a region bigger than Costa Rica, it was being run by an IMC, Ireng Sawariwau IMC. It's just crazy. Bartica is the capital of a region bigger than the Netherlands, and Bartica was being run by an IMC. But we changed all that. Out of respect for the residents of Mazruni Kuyuni, they now have a capital town at Bartica, which runs that region. Out of respect for the people of the Rupununi, they now have a capital instead of being run by an interim management committee. It doesn't matter who wins the chairmanship or the mayorship of the council. What matters is the quality of life of the people of those regions. And when we look at what happened in terms of resources and assets and finances, there are 10 RDCs, there are 70 NDCs, there are 10 town councils. And yes, in 2021, the Ministry of Local Government and Regional Development, as it's called now, we used to call it the Ministry of Communities, received 75 billion, went up to 79 billion in 2022. And it's gone up to 84.5 billion in 2023. Seems like a lot of money that the Ministry of Local Government and Regional Development has access to, but only 20% of that amount reaches the regions. A lot of it stays in Fort Street, Kingston. A lot of it is tied up in bureaucracy. So instead of the money going to develop the region, they're developing the ministry. And that is what is suffocating growth. Because in the regions, if you look at the regions, you could see that what the APNU AFC inherited was a shambolic regional situation. We pumped life back into the regions. Public infrastructure had deteriorated significantly in many communities. And that is what caused the economic stagnation. That's why we established these 4 towns. So the towns would be dynamos, the towns would propel growth. Progress was impeded, not only when the PPP was in administration, when they were in opposition. Because, as you know, their chairmen were elected to certain regions, big regions too. But they didn't pay attention to investment. Communities in the hinterland, those of you who live in the hinterland and those of you who visited the hinterland, would know that those hinterland communities, particularly much more than coastland communities, are dependent on airstrips. They're dependent on bridges. They're dependent on roads and steadings for services and supplies. They're dependent on services such as utilities, pure water supply, solid waste disposal. And, these were not utilities and services which were wrecked by the APNU AFC. They were not there after 23 years of PPP government. So we tried our best with our limited resources to rectify these problems. And what we see now is that now that petroleum revenue is available, some money is being spent, thank God. to improve the lives of the people. But a lot of the efforts to improve those conditions were stymied um, by the PPP administration. Look at Region 8, for example. Those of you who have ever had the privilege of visiting Region 8 would know that is the Potaro Siparuni, would know it is potentially the most beautiful region. It is at the heart of Guyana. It contains a large portion of the Pacaraimans, and to wake up in the morning in the Potaro Siparuni and look at the mountains, you can see this is Guyana. This is, as the song goes, almost heaven. But there's not a single highway. Every year, the government probably talks about a safari. This is 2023. How can you have a safari in one of the most important regions of Guyana? It is an insult to describe transportation in Region 8 as a safari. That is because, well, we didn't do it, and that is because no government has ever put a highway running east-west through the Potaro Siparuni. And these are things that need to be dealt with. And they're not the fault of one party or another, but they're a fault of the way local government has been conceived, has been perceived. Now, so we saw a situation where public infrastructure was ignored. Now we see some attempt is being made to pay attention to pure water supply. For example, APNUFC put in wells for the first time in the South Rupununi. We repaired the Bartica Stelling throughout the country. This program is not for boasting and comparing. This program is one for pointing to the direction. And this is what we must consider when we talk about local government elections. When we see what has happened in terms of local democracy, we realize now, on reflection, that it was the establishment of 4 capital towns at Bartica, Letta, Mabaruma, and Madia by the APNU, which led to the decentralization of development, the devolution of authority, and the direct involvement of citizens in development. The citizens know best what they need. Those who live in the house know where the roof leaks, and the citizens know best what their regions need, what their towns need. This is why we introduced the concept of National Day of Villages, because the villagers know. They don't want government officials to barge into the villages, handing out hampers and telling them what to do. The villagers know best what their needs are. Just give them a basketball court, that's not development. Sit down and speak with the NDCs, speak with the representatives of the people. That is what democracy is all about. And that's why, when we were in government, we introduced the National Regional Development Consultative Committee to promote collaboration and cooperation and consultation within the regions and between regions. That is why my administration introduced plans of action for regional development, PARD. So the regions actually now know where they want to go because their councils have come to these conclusions. Not somebody in Fort Street, Kingston, but the regional councils, the NDCs themselves have decided what is best for their communities, the PARDs, even the villages. And some of these 2 shows can tell you about the VIPs, village improvement plans. They are concerned, but they don't want to be dominated. They don't want to be dictated to. And if we're not careful, this is where local government elections will lead us. It will lead us nowhere because some people are bent on capturing and controlling and dominating instead of giving voice to the people. And we also introduced the RACE, Regional Agriculture and Commercial Expositions. And let me tell you this, even the PPP regional chairmen saw the wisdom, at least some of them saw the wisdom. I sat with them at these RACE, and they brought out small and micro producers, small enterprises. It was beautiful. I've been to them myself. And unfortunately, some diehards refused to convene RACE because those were the orders, presumably from Freedom House. But many of them saw the wisdom because they wanted to develop the regions. So we had these PARDS, the plans of action for regional development. We had the village improvement plans, the VIPs. We had the RACS. It's not an alphabet contest, but these were real development proposals. And it means that the APNUFC was not sitting on its hands, but it was encouraging the people themselves to take control of their regions. You can't run the region from 4th Street, Kingston, or from Rob Street. You have to allow the people to speak, and that is what local government elections should be about. Let us look at the laws. Yes, laws cannot enforce themselves. There's the Fiscal Transfers Act, stating how money should be allocated to town councils in order to finance their independence. They should have some financial autonomy. Local government, Local Authorities Amendment Act directed that local government elections be held. And we see people up to 2023 kicking the can down the road. The law lays down when elections should be held. We had the Local Democratic Organs Act, which required every council to devise its general development plans and programs to ensure consistency with the national plans and objectives. And that each councillor should endeavor to cooperate with every other councillor. That is what it calls for. Then we have the Local Government Commission Act, which set up the Local Government Commission. And we have the Municipal District and Councils Amendment Act, which seeks to modify the Municipal and District Council, the original act, in order to govern the town council. So you see, we have the laws. And it's a question of enforcement of the law that we're now faced with as we go to local government elections. My friends, the local government elections, unfortunately, are being approached with the notorious winner-takes-all mindset. Some people are bent on capturing so-called strongholds. They're bent on controlling every single town. This ought not to be the objective of local government elections. Capturing and controlling will not guarantee local democracy. And unless we have the people who want to win accepting and adopting and adhering to the spirit of the Constitution and the spirit of the laws, we are going to end up nowhere. We're not going to move forward in terms of local government. So I hope that people modify this rhetoric and pay attention to the people's needs, to consultation. And as we look on the way forward, we should try to determine how these NDCs could really be empowered, and how the town councils could be empowered, rather than being starved of funds and trying to replace them with handpicked people. Let the people themselves decide who they want to represent them. And in so doing, local government elections should aim at creating a regime of inclusionary consultation, so that officials could plan their budgets. Officials who have already crafted the plans of action for regional development could be heard. There must be investment and subventions in order to strengthen the NDCs. Some NDCs, you're talking about $5 million. Even if you're a house owner, there's not much you can do with your own house with $5 million, much less a whole neighborhood. So unless there is some change in the way that money is provided to the NDCs, again, many of them are life support level. They cannot develop the neighborhood because they're not intended to develop the neighborhood. That is the problem. There must be greater investment. There must be industrialization. That is, we must encourage microprocessing in the villages themselves. We must augment agricultural production. Don't worry with hemp, don't worry with sorghum. We must produce food for the people. And we can install factories, small microprocessing factories and enterprises to encourage the production of food for people to eat. That is one of the big problems with the standard of living nowadays. No point telling the people about roses and sorghum. They want food, and that is the priority. And there must be some increased level of industrialization to allow these communities to produce and process food. Not only in the coastline, but also in the hinterland. There must be also infrastructural improvement. That is, the aerodromes have to be improved, the bridges have to be improved or built. For example, the longest river in Guyana doesn't have a single bridge. We still have to cross it with pontoons, and no point, celebrating the ministry of this or the ministry of that building a bridge over a trench in Sophia. What we need is serious infrastructure, building a bridge over the Essequibo River so that people can go to the hinterland and security forces can go to the hinterland and control crime there. This is what we need. And those developments in terms of aerodromes, in terms of roadways and highways, in terms of the stellings, must receive greater attention. And the local government elections must focus on these issues, not about capturing and controlling, but on development and improving the lives of people. My friends, local government is important. Local democracy should aim at improving people's quality of life. And it can do so by satisfying their basic needs for safety, for security, and for economically viable neighborhoods. Citizens are creatures in their communities. They eat, live, go to school in those communities. And the communities must be shaped in a way to give the citizens a better quality of life. The forthcoming local government elections could end up leading us nowhere if people continue this talk about capturing and controlling. The results of these elections must ensure that citizens, and let me quote what I've said earlier a few minutes ago, communities have to be organized so as to involve as many people as possible in the task of managing and developing the communities in which they live. That is what local democracy must mean. And that is what the forthcoming local government elections must mean to all Guyanese. Thank you, and may God bless you.
Let us cooperate for the young. Let us cooperate for our land. Let us resolve to fight together. See we do it right together. Can we do it? Yes, we can.
Each man must do his